I stood frozen in the parking lot, both hands gripping my bag straps like I was holding on to whatever was left of a day slipping out of my control. It was still light outside, but the empty space in front of me felt darker than any corner of that lot. My SUV, my car, bought with my money under my name, was gone. It wasn't parked wrong. It wasn't towed. It was gone. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Jake, my husband. "Mom needs the car. I'll explain later." I read it slowly, each word cutting a little. It wasn't a request. It wasn't him asking if I was okay. It was a done deal dropped into my life like anything that was mine could always be decided by someone else. That feeling of being violated washed over me, not because of the car, because of the audacity. I called Jake right away. He picked up after a long ring, like he was deciding whether he wanted to face me or not. "Jake, where's my car?" I asked straight out. His voice was low and tense. "I'm driving it. Mom needed it." I took a long breath. "And you think a text is enough?" I heard some noise in the background. Then my mother-in-law, Linda, spoke up loud and clear, not a hint of hesitation. "She doesn't need it today." That line sent a cold strip down my back, not because of what she said, but how she said it. Casual, matter of fact, like my life was part of her storage shed and she could grab whatever she wanted. "Jake," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this isn't the first time you've done something like this." "You're overreacting," he shot back. He didn't sound angry, just afraid of a confrontation. Like always, I stared at the empty spot where my car used to be, and that familiar feeling from years past surfaced again. My husband always chose the easier path, not the right one. Easy meant pleasing his mom. Easy meant dodging conflict. And the right thing usually got left for me to handle alone. All those old signs were suddenly sharper than ever. There was a time we were on our way to a show I'd waited a month to see. His mom called, said she felt bored. My husband turned the car around instantly, didn't ask me once. There was a time we had an anniversary dinner, but she wanted him to come change a light bulb. He got up right away, left me sitting in the restaurant with 2 full glasses of water. There were times she got upset because my husband spent more time with me than with her, and he stayed quiet, like a kid being reminded of his duties. I used to think it was odd, used to feel irritated, but I never named it. Not until the day my car disappeared from that parking lot. When I got home, my dad, Robert, was sitting at the dining table. He looked up when I walked in, calm eyes with an edge sharp enough to cut through a tablecloth. He didn't need anyone to explain. One look at my face and he knew something was wrong. "What happened?" my dad asked. I told him everything, from the missing car to what my mother-in-law said on the phone. No extra details, no trimming. My dad listened quietly, like he was slotting each piece into a larger picture. When I finished, he leaned back a little, fingers laced in front of him. "You think they only took your car?" The question wasn't loud, but it hit harder than any raised voice. It cracked open the thing I'd been trying not to face. This didn't start today. And it wasn't going to end with getting an SUV back. "What are you trying to say?" I asked. "No one takes something that belongs to you," he said slowly, "unless you've shown them your boundaries can be pushed." I went quiet, not because I disagreed, but because the truth was too clear to argue with. I picked up my phone, about to text Jake again, when a new alert popped up from the bank. An email with a subject line that felt like ice. "A new inquiry has been submitted under your name." I froze. My heart slipped a beat. I hadn't submitted any inquiry. No loan, no new account, no application for anything. In that short moment, everything shifted into a darker, deeper direction, one far more dangerous than a missing car. I looked at my dad. He caught my expression instantly. What else happened? I handed him my phone, unable to form a full sentence. He studied the screen, then gave it back. "This," he said. voice low and heavy, isn't about the car anymore. This is tied to your identity. I felt it clearly. I was stepping into another layer of secrets my husband and mother-in-law had been keeping. And it didn't feel like being violated anymore. It felt like a warning. And the only thing I knew for sure was this. This was just the beginning. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop, my palms still cold and damp from the shock of that bank alert. I logged into my account, trying to keep my breathing steady. When the list of transactions came up, my eyes stopped right away on a strange line, a short-term loan under my name, submitted that same morning. It felt like someone had grabbed the whole room and spun it hard. I had never, not once, applied for any kind of loan. I lived neatly, clearly, and I never touched anything that carried that kind of credit risk. I zoomed in on the loan details, my hands slightly shaking. My name, my ID number, my address, my phone number, everything was correct. So accurate it made me feel completely exposed. But the signature field was blank on the online view. To see it, I had to download the scanned contract. I paused for a beat. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. I hit download. The moment the file appeared, I called Jake. He picked up faster this time, like he'd been waiting for the call. Jake, I said, forcing my voice not to shake. I just found a loan under my name. Do you know anything about this? There was a long stretch of silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing hard, like he was wiping his palms on his jeans. Finally, he said, Natalie, Mom needed money. It was urgent. I closed my eyes. You used my name? His voice dropped, almost stripped of whatever confidence he had left. I didn't want you to panic. That line, once again, pressed deeper into the crack. He didn't want me to panic, so he chose for me not to know anything until the truth blew up like a fire no one could put out. I asked, what was the money for? Jake let out a long breath, each sound pulled out of him. Mom's in trouble. She maxed out all her credit cards. She said if she doesn't pay right away, they'll send her to collections. I listened, and two opposite feelings hit me at once. Part of me wasn't surprised. My mother-in-law had always been quick to push her financial messes onto someone else. But the other part, I couldn't believe my husband went this far. Using my identity, signing a loan in my name just because she said it was urgent. Do you understand this isn't a small thing? I said, slow and waited. This is a crime, Jake. I opened the contract file I'd downloaded. My eyes went straight to the signature line, and when I saw it, my whole body went cold. Signature, Natalie Reed. But it wasn't mine. The N curled in a way I'd never written. The D at the end stretched out wrong, nothing like the way I signed my name. It wasn't my signature. It was some kind of imitation clumsy, but just good enough to fool someone who'd never seen the real thing. I put a hand over my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. This was no longer about someone taking my car or my husband choosing his mother over me. This was identity fraud. This was criminal. Jake, I said through my teeth, who signed this? I heard a chair scrape, like he stood up and sat back down. Mom said she could sign for you. She said it wasn't a big deal. She said you would understand. I let out a laugh, but there was nothing funny in it. Just a tired, broken sound. My mother-in-law didn't understand boundaries. She only lived in 2 states, being served or being betrayed. I didn't say another word. I just hung up. My dad was standing in the kitchen doorway, and I had no idea how long he'd been there. He watched me for a long moment, his eyes sharper than the calm on his face. Did you open it? He asked. I handed him the loan contract. He wasn't surprised. Somehow, that almost made the hurt in me more visible, because he had seen what I'd refused to see for far too long. My dad set the papers down and crossed his arms. You've just stepped into something Jake has lived with his whole life. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? He looked straight at me. Jake grew up in fear, not fear of his mom being hurt, but fear of her getting angry. And now you're the one paying for that fear. I sat down, my palms sweating. Everything was shifting into a new shape. This wasn't a couple's argument. This wasn't a daughter-in-law issue. This was me being pushed into legal danger because two people thought they had the right to do it. Before I could say anything else, my phone buzzed again. A new email. Subject: Your vehicle has been temporarily transferred as collateral. I tapped it open. My SUV, the asset under my name, bought with my own money, had been temporarily transferred as collateral for the fraudulent loan. It felt like the ground shifted under me, like someone had pushed my entire life in a direction I didn't even know existed. I looked at my dad. He didn't say, "Calm down." He didn't say, "We'll fix this." He said one sentence, the one that opened the door to everything that came next. "This isn't where it ends." And I knew, from the moment my SUV was turned into collateral under a forged version of my name, the game had changed. It was no longer carelessness, no longer my husband's dependency, no longer my mother-in-law's temper. This was criminal, and my dad was not the kind of man who let something like this slide. That night, after reading the email about my SUV being used as collateral, I couldn't sleep. It felt like something was knocking inside my chest, slow but forceful. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was the clear realization that there were answers I'd never get if I kept standing on the sidelines. The next morning, I drove my dad's car to my mother-in-law's apartment. I didn't call ahead. I didn't bring the urge to please anyone. I came to hear the truth, not excuses. She opened the door with a look of annoyance, like I was the one inconveniencing her. Morning light hit from behind me, while her apartment looked dimmer, murkier, like a place packed with secrets no one wanted exposed. "What are you doing here?" she asked right away, not even waiting for me to step in. "I want to talk about the loan," I said. She waved her hand and walked back inside without inviting me in, but I stepped in anyway. The small apartment carried a mix of scented candles and cold food, making the air feel even heavier. She crossed her arms and looked at me like I was overreacting. "I don't understand why you're acting like this," she said. "Jake has always taken care of me. That's what a good son does." That line made me straighten up. Not because it was new, but because it was the answer to every question I'd been carrying for years. "But you used my name to take out a loan," I said slowly. "And you signed my name." She shrugged. "It's just paperwork. Stop making it dramatic." I stared at her. She didn't think this was serious, not because she was naive, but because she'd never once in her life had to face consequences. Jake always cleaned up behind her, and now she assumed I would too. "You had no right to do that," I said, keeping my voice steady. She let out a thin, mocking laugh. "You don't understand how this family works. Jake belongs with his family. He knows what he owes me." When I heard that, it was like I suddenly saw the whole chain of years behind my husband. The reminders, the demands, the emotional hooks she used to make sure he always chose her first. It wasn't love. It was ownership. I didn't say anything else. I left the apartment before the things I truly wanted to say crossed my own limits. When I got home, Jake was sitting at the dining table. He didn't look up right away when I walked in, like he already knew things were worse than he wanted to admit. "You went to see Mom?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said, sitting down and keeping my eyes on him. "Now it's your turn to talk." My husband swallowed hard. Sweat dotted his forehead, even though the room was cool. He put his hands on the table, then pulled them back like he was afraid they'd betray him. "I didn't want things to get like this," he started. "You have to believe me. Mom said she didn't know what else to do. And you thought using my name was the solution?" He tightened both hands. "I've done this before, Natalie. Not with your name, but with my accounts. When Mom got into debt, I was always the one who stepped in." "How many times?" I asked. He took a deep breath. enough times that I stopped counting. That hit me harder than the forged signature. My husband hadn't just been pulled into his mother's mess. He'd been living inside it since he was young. Mom used my credit when I was in college, he went on. She said she'd fix it. She never did. And every time I tried to say no, she'd say it was because I didn't care enough. I saw his shoulders tremble a little, like he was slowly peeling off the thin layers of armor he'd been using to hide everything all these years. He's afraid of confronting Mom, he admitted, and I'm afraid of losing you. But I don't know how to stop. I'm stuck between the two people who matter most to me, and I keep choosing the easier way. The easier way is letting someone else pay for your choices? I asked. I wasn't angry, just hurt. He looked up, his eyes red like tears were right there but refusing to fall. I didn't want you to get hurt. I thought I could fix everything before you found out. I looked at him, and in that moment I saw the truth clearly. My husband wasn't a bad person. He was just someone who didn't know how to stand upright in front of anyone except me. And that broke my heart more than any betrayal ever could. If you can't stand up for yourself, I said softly, how can you stand up for us? He lowered his head, rubbing his hands over his face like he was trying to find the pieces of himself. I know, he said, his voice almost cracking. I know I messed up, but Mom, she raised me to believe my life belongs to her. I heard that, and it clicked into place like the last piece of a puzzle. My husband didn't choose dependence. He was raised into it, and I walked into a marriage with a man who had never truly been free. My dad came home near the end of the afternoon. He looked at me first, then at my husband, then at the stack of documents on the table. I checked further, he said, setting down a printed sheet from the credit system. Your mother-in-law is on a credit monitoring list for revolving debt. Jake looked up, startled. How did you get that? My dad didn't answer him. He looked at me. You can't save someone who doesn't want to stop, and you can't sacrifice your identity for them. His words hit the exact hollow space I'd been trying to fill. Part of me wanted to protect my husband. Another part knew I couldn't keep living inside this cycle. Jake looked at me like I was his last hope. But hope can't save anyone when the root of the problem hasn't changed. My dad stood up straight, his voice calm but carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much in his life. If you want to stand somewhere, you have to walk there yourself. No one said anything after that. Not because we didn't know what to say, but because the truth was already out, and there was no need to underline it. I looked at Jake, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw a crack between us that couldn't be covered by love, a crack bigger than the car, bigger than the loan, bigger than the betrayal. It was the crack of a whole life spent being controlled for him and for me, the realization that I'd stepped into that life without ever knowing it. And I understood. The next part of this story wasn't just going to decide his future or my mother-in-law's future. It was going to decide mine. After my dad's words, the mood in the house shifted completely. My husband clung to apologies, and I stayed quiet, not out of anger, but because I was seeing everything from a different height. And my dad? He all but disappeared from our sight for the next 2 days. No questions, no commentary, nothing directed at my husband, and that silence told me exactly what he was doing. On the third evening, I walked past his office and saw the door cracked open. My dad sat at his wooden desk, the lamp casting a warm circle of light over the thick stack of documents in front of him. He didn't notice me, but I recognized everything laid out. Scanned loan contracts, printed text from Jake, the bank inquiry history, and even footage stills from the parking lot cameras, the ones he'd asked building management to pull. He was building a file my mother-in-law, someone who'd never believed consequences were real, would never imagine she'd have to face. The next morning, in the kitchen, my dad spoke softly. Go to work. I'll handle this on my end. I didn't ask what his end meant. My dad never acted on impulse. He only moved when he had enough evidence that no one could argue with. 2 days later, my mother-in-law got the first hit. Around 10 a.m., my husband called me, his voice shaking even though he tried to keep it steady. "Natalie, the police just showed up at Mom's place." I stopped in the middle of the office, my heart dropping into some lower floor inside me. What did they say? They asked her to come in for questioning about signing your name, about using your vehicle as collateral. I heard chaos in the background. My mother-in-law's voice cut through the phone, sharp, high, panicked in a way I'd never heard from her. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them Natalie said it was fine." My husband said something back to her, but the line was too messy to make it out. Then he came back to me. "Mom is freaking out. She's never had police at her door." I closed my eyes, not satisfied, not vindicated, just heavy, deep, but right. My mother-in-law wasn't shaken because I'd struck back. She was shaken because for the first time in her life, there was no one standing in front of her to take the blow. And my husband, this was the first time he'd ever seen his mother face reality, not the version she scripted. "Jake," I said quietly, "you know this didn't come from me, right?" He was silent for a moment. Then he spoke very softly. "I know. Your dad did this." It wasn't an accusation. It was like he was finally seeing the line between right and wrong after living in the gray for years. When Jake came home that evening, he nearly collapsed by the door. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said, holding his head. "Mom said you were coming after her. She thought you wanted to humiliate her." I sat next to him, but I didn't touch him. "Jake, you have to understand. No one is humiliating your mom. This isn't revenge. This is the law." He looked up, eyes red. "I know. And that's what scares me. Because Mom thought she could do anything. And I let her." That was the second collapse. Not because his mother was in trouble, but because he finally realized this wasn't a family issue he could solve with silence or sacrifice. The law doesn't care who's the mother, who's the son. The law only looks at the actions. "I'm sorry," Jake said through shaky breaths. "I'm sorry I let it get this far. I'm sorry I didn't choose you from the start." I looked at him for a long moment. For the first time, I didn't see the man I married in his eyes. I saw a child trapped in a loop of guilt and an adult who learned to live the same way. "Jake," I said softly, "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but you also didn't protect me." He nodded, like someone confessing to himself more than to me. Later that afternoon, my dad handed me an envelope. "The loan company responded," he said. Inside the envelope was a document confirming the loan had been canceled because the signature was identified as fraudulent, along with a standard but necessary apology. My SUV was released from collateral status. No more legal ties to me. But the second paper mattered far more. A formal notice of investigation against my mother-in-law for forging a signature, using personal information without permission, and falsifying a financial loan application. My husband stood behind me as I opened the envelope. I felt his breath catch. "God," he whispered, "Mom could be prosecuted." My dad rested a hand on the back of the chair and said, calm but razor sharp, "That's what happens when someone thinks they're above the law." Jake turned away, running a hand through his hair. You didn't ask for this to happen, right?" I looked straight at him. "No, I didn't do anything," my dad added, his voice like the final cut separating right from wrong. "My daughter didn't press charges. I did. Her identity was violated. No one gets to take that from her." My husband stepped back. I saw the exact moment he understood. This wasn't me getting revenge. It wasn't me wanting his mother hurt. This was a father protecting his daughter, in the only language someone like my mother-in-law would ever understand, the law. When things finally quieted down that night, I sat alone in the living room, not to cry, not to dwell on the fallout, but to look straight at the truth. Life was demanding a choice from me. Jake stood in the middle, with nowhere left to hide. My mother-in-law was facing possible prosecution, and I stood on the edge between compassion and saving myself. My dad set a cup of tea beside me. "See," he said, "it's not that you're not strong. You just were never allowed to stand up straight." I looked at him. There was no triumph in his eyes, just the resolve of someone who knows his own worth and wants me to learn mine. And I knew what comes next won't be about my mother-in-law anymore. It won't be about the loan or the SUV. It'll be about me and the choice I can't delay any longer. I got my SUV back on a clear morning, sunlight glinting off the surface like nothing had ever happened. But when I opened the door, the feeling wasn't joy. There was no victory, no satisfaction, just a deep stillness, like I was reclaiming a part of myself I let others step over for far too long. I set my hand on the steering wheel, a long breath, light but heavy with meaning. The car was just an object. What I really got back was my boundary. That afternoon, Jake came to see me. He stood at the door like he wasn't sure whether to knock or turn away. When I opened it, his eyes were tired, but for the first time in weeks, I saw real honesty in them. "He started therapy," Jake said, as we sat down at the kitchen table. "The first 2 sessions were harder than I expected, but the therapist told me something that shocked me, that I've never lived my own life." I stayed quiet and listened. I didn't interrupt, didn't rephrase anything for him, just listened. "I know I messed up," he said, voice low, "and I want to fix it. I want to start over, if you'll give me the chance." I looked down at my hands resting on the table. I'd waited a long time to hear those words, but now that they were here, my heart didn't thump or tighten the way I thought it would. It just stayed still. Calm like water after the wind finally stops. "Jake," I said softly but clearly, "I'm glad you're in therapy. I'm glad you want to fix yourself. But that doesn't automatically mean we have to go back to how we were." He looked up, eyes a little wider, but he didn't argue. He understood. He really understood. And the silence between us this time wasn't suffocating. It was clear, clean, honest. "I just want you to know," Jake added, "that I'm going to try to change, no matter what you decide." I nodded. "I believe you." No tears, no promises, no dramatic goodbye, just 2 people finally seeing themselves clearly. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the warm yellow light falling across the floor, and I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. I was just like my husband. I'd been living in a way that tried to keep the peace at any cost. I gave in, stayed quiet, made myself smaller, all so things wouldn't fall apart. But real peace doesn't come from staying silent. Real peace comes from knowing you deserve respect. You deserve boundaries. You deserve a life that's bigger than fear. I'd blame Jake for not standing up for me, but I'd never stood up for myself either. Realizing that felt gentle and painful at the same time. But it was the kind of pain that leads somewhere better. The next morning, I picked up the SUV keys and walked into the garage. Daylight streamed through the big window, brightening the whole space in a way the past few days never had. I opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, and set my hands on the wheel like I was touching the doorway to the next part of my life. I turned the engine on. The sound was smooth and steady, and I knew I wasn't driving to escape anything. I was driving to step out of the shadow of a marriage that had been shrinking me little by little. As the car rolled out of the garage, I looked straight ahead. The road was open, bright, and no longer asking me to fold myself small to fit anyone else. In that moment, I heard my own voice inside, Warm, slow, certain. My worth was never lost. I just finally stepped back into it. This was never a story about revenge. Never. I didn't need my mother-in-law to hurt for me to grow stronger. I didn't need my husband to kneel and apologize for me to feel respected. I didn't need someone else's life to fall apart for mine to stand tall. I just needed to choose myself. Strength isn't striking back. Strength is knowing when to stop. Strength is letting go of what's no longer whole. Strength is moving forward without carrying anger. Strength is being clear enough to say, I deserve a life bigger than this. And I kept driving, slow, steady, unafraid. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not because I left someone, but because I finally came back to myself.